Let me tell you something strange. I once stood in front of the mirror on a Monday morning and didn't recognize the person looking back at me. It wasn't because I changed my hairstyle. It wasn't because I lost weight. It was because I saw my own eyes and they were empty. Wake up, go to work, answer emails, make a few calls, eat something quick, then repeat. I wasn't sad. I wasn't happy either. I was just drifting. As if my life was running on autopilot. Then a question suddenly cracked open in my mind and it stopped me cold. If I keep living like this for another year, will I still recognize myself? We often think change has to be something big, that it takes months, years, or a life-altering event. But no, change doesn't need time. It needs a decision. One moment where you stop living as a faded copy of yourself and start living with intention. I'm not here to give you motivation today. I'm here to give you strategy, a blueprint, a 7-day roadmap, so that by the end of this week, when you look back in the mirror, you won't recognize the person staring at you. Not because you become someone else, but because you finally see the strongest, clearest version of who you truly are. Are you ready? Take a deep breath. Because what follows is 7 days with no room for delay, only for those who are ready to leave the old version behind. I realized something no one ever taught me. The way you start your morning is the way you're building your life. Every day, you stand before an invisible gate, a gate of time, of choice, of identity, and that gate opens the moment you wake up. The question is, will you walk through it as a leader or be dragged through it by distraction? Most people don't lose their lives because they lack willpower, but because they lose the first hour of each day. No one tells you it's dangerous, but it is the seed, the beginning of a silent chain reaction where the world starts to control you before you've even taken your first breath with awareness. I used to be that person. Wake up, grab the phone, check messages, scroll the feed, read some bad news, see someone bragging about their success, and before I even brushed my teeth, I already felt like I had lost. Lost at the starting line, not because I lacked talent, but because I handed over the steering wheel of my mind to someone else in the most sacred moment of the day, the moment I opened my eyes. Then I changed one thing, just one, and that week transformed. I left my phone outside the bedroom, I opened my eyes, sat up, drank a glass of water. I didn't check social media. I checked in with myself. I wrote down 3 things I would do. I stretched, I took a deep breath, and something magical happened. For the first time in years, I felt like I was leading my day instead of chasing it. That first hour isn't a routine. It's sacred ground. It's where you reset your identity, where you teach your brain, I'm here. I get to decide what today will mean. Jim Rohn once said, either you run the day or the day runs you. That's not a slogan. It's a formula. Successful people don't start their day in chaos. They start with awareness, with choice, with small actions repeated like bricks, building something great. And you don't have to overcomplicate it. You don't need to meditate for 30 minutes, run 5 kilometers, or read 50 pages at 5 a.m. if that's not your style. But you do need to choose. You need to guard that first hour like a warrior, protecting the gates of your mind. Put the phone down, breathe, walk. Write down 3 things you need to do, not because the list is magic, but because when you write it, you reclaim the driver's seat. If you feel lost, tired, uninspired, maybe your life isn't off track. Maybe you've just been letting someone else drive your morning. Don't say you don't have time. You do. But time only serves those who know how to lead it. Don't let your mind be a public space where anyone can enter. The first hour is private land, and you are the only one allowed to step on it before anyone else. I'm not promising that waking up an hour early will change the whole world, but I promise this. If you wake up with purpose, with intention, with small and clear actions, you'll change your internal state. And that's what makes the biggest difference. Because once you win the first hour, you begin to win yourself. And once you win yourself, there is nothing out there left to fear. After you start your day as a creator, no longer swept along by the crowd, there's one more thing that must be addressed immediately. Because no matter how early you wake up, how many goals you write down, how deeply you breathe, if you're still holding on to one weak habit, it's like rowing a boat with a hidden hole in it. And no matter how hard you try, it will eventually sink you. Here's a truth nobody wants to admit. We are not defined by the good things we add to our lives, but by the things we continue to keep, even when we know they're pulling us down. Not because we're weak, but because what's familiar often feels like safety. And sometimes a habit has lived with us for so long that we no longer recognize it as the problem. I used to have one of those habits, staying silent in important meetings, even when I had something to say. Why? Because I was afraid I wasn't valuable enough to be heard. A habit that seemed small, but it silently chipped away at my self-worth. I withdrew from my own life without anyone asking me to. And every time I chose silence, I was teaching my brain, my opinion doesn't matter. You have one of those habits too. Everyone does. Maybe it's checking social media every time you feel anxious. Maybe it's that third glass of wine you know you shouldn't have. Maybe it's avoiding important work by staying busy with meaningless tasks. And deep down, you already know. You don't need me to point it out. You just need to look yourself in the eye and ask, if I remove one thing that's been dragging me down, just one, what would change? Jim Rohn once said, "You cannot change your destination overnight, but you can change your direction." Cutting one weak habit is your first redirection. It doesn't need to be 20 things, just one, but it has to be the one you're afraid to face. The one you excuse with lines like, "It's not that bad, everyone does it," or "I'll quit next week." Because that habit is whispering to you every single day, it's okay to live below your standards, just a little longer. And that little longer becomes a whole year. This isn't about perfection. It's about setting a new boundary with yourself, about declaring, the old version of me no longer gets to decide. You don't need anyone's permission to let that habit go. You just need to deliver a verdict. Like the judge of your own life, this habit ends today. And don't let it be an empty declaration. Replace it. If you normally scroll your phone in the morning, put a notebook next to your bed and write 3 affirmations. If you tend to procrastinate, set a 10-minute timer and do the most important task right away. If you often speak negatively about yourself, record a strong affirmation and listen to it every morning. Because when you eliminate something that hurts your self-respect, you're not just cleaning up your mind. You're opening the path to a new standard of living, one where excuses don't belong. Only clarity, intention, and progress. And now I want you to step in. If you had to choose just one weak habit to let go of today, just one, what would it be? Write it down in the comments. Not for me. But because you deserve to live as the person you know you're capable of becoming, I remember a morning a few years ago when I woke up and felt heavy. Not my body, my mind. The kind of heaviness that makes you not want to leave the bed. Not because of lack of sleep, but because you no longer have a reason to start the day. I sat there in that tired silence, and my body gave me no sign it wanted to help. Then I stood up. No inspirational music, no pep talk, just one step, then another, then a walk, then a jog. Not fast, not pretty, but something strange happened after 10 minutes. My mind began to lighten. Not because my situation changed, but because I was moving with intention, not like someone trying to escape. There's a truth we don't talk about enough. Your body doesn't just reflect your mind, it shapes it. The way you walk, the way you stand tall or slump, the way you lean forward or let your weight drag you down. It's all a message, not to others, to yourself. When you move like someone who is drained, you label yourself as someone who has no fire left. When you drag your feet like every day is a sentence, your mind begins to act like life is something to endure, not something to own. But when you straighten your back, when you walk just half a step faster, when you pull your shoulders back, breathe deeply, and step outside as if something is waiting for you, even if you don't know what it is, you send a silent command to yourself. I'm here. And I'm not playing small anymore. You don't need to hit the gym for 2 hours a day. You don't need the body of an athlete. What you need is intentional movement. Movement that protects your energy, awakens your identity, and walks you toward your stronger self. Someone who doesn't hide behind the couch or the phone, but faces life one grounded step at a time. And understand this, your body doesn't demand perfection. It demands respect. You cannot expect focus, creativity, or confidence if you don't give your body a reason to show up that way. Fresh air, a little sweat, a strong posture, a walk without your phone, a shoulder roll, a neck stretch, and a quiet whisper, "I'm still here, and I haven't quit." David Goggins once said, "You're in a battle with yourself. Move like it." And he's right. You're not just working out, you're building discipline. You're not just walking. You're stepping through laziness, delay, and silent retreat. Every step is proof that you're still alive, still present, and still on a mission to complete. You won't always feel motivated, but you can always create movement. And movement, even the smallest kind, always creates energy. Think about it. The days you feel worst aren't when you're exhausted, but when you're disconnected from yourself. You want to feel alive? Don't wait for inspiration. Move like someone who lives with purpose. Jim Rohn once said, "Take care of your body. It's the only place you have to live." But I believe there's something deeper. Your body is the shelter for your spirit. If you let it collapse, your spirit will shrink. If you lift it up, your spirit will rise too. And the world will notice, because you can't walk into a room like you're carrying the weight of the world and expect people to see you as a leader. You have to walk in like someone who's present, grounded, and confident without needing to be loud. And that begins not with words, but with how you move. Today, let your body say what you haven't found the words to express. I'm not perfect, but I'm here. I'm moving forward. I haven't given up. And I no longer walk like an old version of myself. Movement is healing. It's a quiet but powerful declaration. I'm rebuilding myself from the ground up, from the feet, from the breath, from the stance, from each step. You can't focus when you're standing in a crowd screaming into your ears. And the scary thing is, most of us are living that way every single day. A life full of noise, but completely lacking in clarity. Not because we're weak, but because we've never learned how to take charge of our mental environment. And you can't take charge of your life if you don't take charge of what enters your mind. Noise today doesn't just come from car horns, alarms, or unexpected phone calls. It's more subtle than that. It's a mindless swipe on social media. It's a video you didn't mean to watch, but stayed with because of the algorithm. It's a negative comment you read at 7 a.m. that stays with you all the way to midnight. And day by day, you let those fragments of noise land in your mind until you can no longer tell what you truly believe from what the world accidentally planted in you. I used to live like that. I let the morning news decide my mood. I let social media tell me whether I had made it or not. I let the negative voices in my head become familiar background noise, not loud enough to stop me, but constant enough to erode my confidence. And then one day, I turned it all off, just for one day. And in that scary silence, I realized something. The voice inside me, the one that used to be so clear when I was a kid with dreams, had almost disappeared. Not because I was lost, but because I had been too busy listening to everything else. I had been pulled away from myself little by little, not by a hammer, but by the endless tapping of noise again and again. You want to change, you want to feel clear, confident, decisive, then first, you have to clean up your mental space, not by running away from life, but by taking control of what you allow in. Start simple. Turn off notifications. Turn off background television. Let go of the meaningless conversations you're keeping out of habit. Don't get caught up in news you can't control and call it staying informed. If something's truly important, you'll hear about it. Everything else, protect your inner state like a fortress. No one gets to walk in without permission. Jordan Peterson once said, "Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world." I would say this: clean up the space in your mind before you try to redesign your outside world, because you can't build anything lasting if your mind is a dusty, chaotic construction site. And don't just think about digital noise. Think about noise from people. Is there someone you're listening to too much, even though you know they're not living the life you want? Is there a relationship that makes you feel smaller every time you walk away instead of stronger? That's noise too. And it needs to be turned down, at least for this week. This isn't a lesson about toxic positivity. It's a lesson about intentional choices, about choosing to listen to the things that make you better, not the things that make you settle. Replace noise with knowledge. Replace negativity with ideas. Replace meaningless chatter with purposeful silence, because it's in that silence that you'll hear the most important thing again: your own voice. And once you hear it again, you won't need endless advice. You won't need constant approval. You won't need to chase anyone's standards, because you'll be clear enough to lead yourself. And clarity, that's always the first thing people notice in someone who's truly living with direction. Not because they have all the answers, but because they know exactly what kind of noise no longer deserves space in their life. I used to start my day like a game of chance. No clear goals, no specific direction, just handling whatever came my way. It sounded flexible, but the truth was this: when you don't have a plan, you're not really living, you're just reacting. And the problem isn't just about productivity, it's about identity. Because a person who has no plan for the day is usually also someone who hasn't made a true commitment to their own life. They let the days blur together and then wonder why a year later they're still in the same place. We don't stay stuck because we lack time. We stay stuck because we lack a map. No one ever gets to a destination they never defined. And no one can change the course of their life if they wake up every morning asking, "What should I do today?" That question might sound spontaneous, but in truth, it's a sign that someone isn't serious yet. Jim Rohn once said, "Don't start your day until you've finished it on paper." That's not poetic advice. That's how people who actually want to grow live their lives. They don't wait for inspiration. They design action. Before the day begins, they've already decided what is worth completing. I started practicing this in the simplest way. Before going to bed, I'd write down the 3 most important things for the next day. No fluff, no vague ideas. Just 3 things: clear, specific, and measurable. And what happened was incredible, and I began waking up with purpose. My day didn't feel scattered anymore. It started to flow in the right direction, not because I finished everything, but because I knew what I was working toward. Don't confuse being busy with having direction. Some days you do a dozen things, and none of them truly move you forward. Other days, you complete just one thing, but it changes your whole state and your results. You don't need to do more. You need to do what matters. And to do what matters, you need a plan. A plan doesn't make you rigid. It frees you from the fog. It gives you the power to say no to what doesn't matter, not because you're rude, but because you've made a commitment to what does. You're no longer nice to every last-minute demand because you know what already requires your serious presence. And don't forget, a plan doesn't live in your head. It lives on paper, on a whiteboard, on your phone, or anywhere you can see it, and hold yourself accountable to it. If you keep it only in your mind, it'll get drowned in life's noise. But when you write it down, you make a statement. I'm leading this day. I'm not waiting for it to decide for me. Mel Robbins once said, "Clarity isn't something you wait for. It's something you create." You don't need to know every step, but you do need to begin your day with the first step already chosen. That's how you build agency. And that daily sense of agency is the mark of someone becoming the strongest version of themselves. Success doesn't come from randomly stumbling into the right opportunity. It comes from preparing so thoroughly that when opportunity shows up, you don't freeze, you execute. And that begins each night. While others fall asleep in chaos, you're mapping out your tomorrow. No one accidentally lives a meaningful life. You have to design it day by day, hour by hour, choice by choice. A planned day isn't a controlled day, it's an invested one. And you can't expect an extraordinary life if you're not disciplined enough to invest in your days with full awareness. Because in the end, a plan doesn't just help you get more done, it helps you become more reliable to yourself. And when you start believing in the promises you write down each night, that's when you stop living like the old version of you. You begin to lead your own life. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work, not from lack of sleep. It comes from knowing you're avoiding something you are meant to face. Every time you walk around difficulty, no one needs to tell you. Because inside you, there's a quiet but clear voice that says, I'm backing down. And if you listen closely, you'll realize the fatigue doesn't come from the action. It comes from living below the standard you know you're worthy of. We live in a time where everything is optimized to be easy. Food delivery apps, technology that replaces effort, endless, clever reasons to delay your dreams. Everything out there is inviting you to take the easy route. But one thing never changes. You cannot build a powerful life by choosing what's easy. Jefferson Fisher once said in a courtroom, when pressure rises, the real person shows up. And that applies in both communication and in life. You don't need to wait for life to push you into hardship. Step into it on purpose. Doing the hard thing doesn't mean seeking suffering. It means you choose to sharpen yourself before life forces you to endure. You step into the places no one wants to go to forge the strength everyone wishes they had. David Goggins calls it callousing the mind, not by destroying yourself, but by facing what makes you feel small every day. It might be the thing you always avoid. Making a hard phone call, waking up early, training seriously, telling the truth you've been hiding, starting the project you keep postponing, or simply refusing to negotiate with laziness for one more day. When you choose to do the hard thing, you're not just changing your actions. You're rebuilding your self-trust. Every time you rise without being pushed, every time you move without an audience, every time you do what's right, even when it's not easy, you are re-signing the contract with your identity. Not someone trying their best, but I am someone who doesn't settle for average. Eric Thomas once shouted this into a microphone. You owe you, and he's right. You owe yourself the courage to face what you fear. You owe yourself the discipline to keep going without applause. You owe yourself a stronger version, one that doesn't need permission to begin. Doing the hard thing doesn't require you to be superhuman. It just requires that you stop asking your emotions for permission. Action doesn't need motivation. It needs decision. And decision must be repeated when you're tired, when you're doubtful, when you feel behind. Because every time you do the hard thing, you take back a piece of your resilience that life tried to wear down. And here's what no one tells you. Once you get used to doing the hard thing, what once scared you becomes your new standard. Running 5K used to be a big deal. Now it's your warm-up. Speaking the truth used to shake you. Now it's your instinct. Discipline used to feel forced. Now it's how you live. That's how you become unrecognizable. Not because you've changed in the eyes of others, but because you look at yourself and realize you've overcome something you used to always run from. And from that moment on, everything begins to shift. Not because the world changed, but because you became brave enough to live like someone who's truly on a mission. I used to have a habit that seemed harmless. When someone asked how I was doing, I'd smile and say, I'm okay, even when I wasn't. When given an important task, I'd say, I'll try, as a subtle way to shield myself in case I failed. When I talked about my goals, I'd end with something soft like, if I have time, as if I wasn't fully serious about them. It sounded humble, casual, but in truth, I was programming myself to live a small life, without commitment, without expectation, without breakthrough. I didn't realize that every word I spoke was quietly rewriting my internal identity, until one day, I listened to a recording of a talk I had given. My voice was full of hesitation. My sentences were filled with escape routes. I was speaking about the things I believed in, but I didn't sound like someone who believed in himself. And that's when I understood something powerful. Language isn't just how you communicate, it's how you command your subconscious. You're not just speaking, you're shaping who you become. We often treat our words like they're disposable, say whatever, joke however, as long as we don't hurt anyone else. But here's the truth. No one pays enough attention to maybe you're not hurting others, but you might be hurting yourself. The words you choose describe who you are, but more importantly, they shape how you live. You can't live like a confident person if you keep saying, I always forget things every time you make a mistake. You can't live with commitment if every sentence comes with an exit like, I don't think this is for me, or I'll do it when I have time. You can't expect to become strong if your go-to phrase is, I'm trying, instead of, I'm doing. Jim Rohn once said, don't say things that don't move you forward. And I believe that applies not just in business, but in every conversation you have with yourself. Because language is not outside of life, it is the silent architecture building your inner core. If you constantly joke about yourself like you're a failure, if you regularly downplay your dreams with sarcasm, if you choose words as if you're asking for permission to live big, then don't be surprised if you end up living small. Mel Robbins calls it verbal architecture. Eric Thomas says it plainly, stop speaking death into your dreams. I call it linguistic discipline, a type of discipline no one teaches in school. But without it, you'll never fully believe you're good enough, strong enough, or worthy enough to step into the best version of yourself. Starting today, I stopped using vague phrases like, I hope, and replaced them with, I'm committed. I no longer say, I'll try, but instead, I'm doing it. I don't need to hide behind soft language to avoid the sting of failure. I speak clearly, boldly, like someone who takes full responsibility for the path they've chosen. You don't need to wait until you succeed to speak like someone successful. You need to speak like someone who has already won, so your actions have something solid to stand on. Words aren't just reflections of reality. They are instructions to your future. When your language changes, your energy changes. When you dare to declare what you're pursuing, even while it's still in progress, you begin to walk as if the future already heard you. And the truth is, the future is always listening. No one sees you at 5 a.m. No one knows you're fighting procrastination, wrestling with temptations, and disciplining every minute of your day. But when you walk out that door, people will sense something, not through your title or your voice, but through your presence. And you don't have to say a word for that to happen. Because presence always speaks first. The way you walk, the way you look, people in the eye, the way you dress, all of it sends a message. I take myself seriously. I'm not talking about designer labels, expensive suits, or anything superficial. I'm talking about intentional neatness. A person living with purpose doesn't step out of the house like they have nothing important to do. They don't dress to impress others. They dress to signal something to themselves. Today matters. I'm showing up for a reason worth showing up well. I used to live in whatever mode. Grabbed any outfit, didn't care about my hair, told myself, it's just work, who cares? But the truth is, every time I left the house with that careless mindset, the day slipped by like a life with no posture. I reacted instead of leading. I shrank instead of stepping forward. I didn't feel like I was living with self-respect. Until one day, I changed not because I got richer, but because I started honoring the version of me I was becoming. Jordan Peterson once said, dress like the person you want to be. And I believe that now more than ever. Not because clothes make the person, but because the person is responsible for showing up in a way that reflects their inner transformation. When you care about the details, clean shoes, pressed shirt, tidy hair, you're not just building an image. You're setting a new standard for how you live. You're whispering to yourself, I matter. I'm here to lead, not to hide. Mel Robbins calls it activating success habits. Because how you dress each morning triggers a chain reaction. You dress sharp, you stand taller, you speak clearer, you walk with purpose. And when you carry yourself like someone on a mission, the world responds in kind. Opportunities show up, not because you're lucky, but because your presence makes people believe you're ready. And what I've learned is this. People who don't respect how they show up often struggle to stay committed internally. Not because they're bad people, but because their mindset gets dragged down to average tenor. Starting with the smallest choices. Wrinkled shirts, dirty shoes, and a good enough attitude. But you weren't born to live a good enough life. You're here to become someone you'd admire when you look back. Jim Rohn once said, "How you do anything is how you do everything." And I'd add to that. The way you step out the door each morning is the way you step into life each day. You don't need a special occasion to show up fully. Every day is a stage, even if no one is watching. Because the most important person is, and that's you. And do you know what happens when you walk out of your home with the right mindset, a proud posture, clear eyes, and careful preparation, even when no one knows where you're going? You begin to live like someone stepping into their destiny. Not because the world sees the difference, but because deep down, you feel it. You're no longer living carelessly. I haven't always been a disciplined person. I used to make promises to myself that I didn't keep. Promised I'd wake up early, then hit snooze. Promised I'd eat healthy, then broke it by day 3. Promised I'd finish something important, then procrastinated, forgot, and forgave myself again. It sounded harmless. But over time, I realized the scary part wasn't missing a goal. It was slowly losing respect for myself. No one punished me. No one yelled. But inside me, every time I broke a promise to myself, a small piece of confidence chipped away, and I started living as someone I no longer trusted. You can say you love yourself, that you're chasing your goals, that you're improving your life, but if your actions don't match your words, you'll find yourself growing quiet in front of the mirror. Not because you don't want better, but because you no longer believe your own promises. And then I changed that with one simple rule. I would build a 7-day discipline chain, not for others, not for show, but to rebuild internal trust. No perfection needed, no performance. Just doing exactly what I said I would do every day. One small promise, one specific action, one quiet consistency. And I did it not because I felt motivated, but because I had decided. David Goggins calls it callousing the mind. I call it restoring self-respect. Because discipline is not punishment. It's the gift of commitment. It's how you say, I matter enough not to abandon myself anymore. Every morning you wake up on time. Every time you say no to the old habit. Every action you take, even when tired, is a brick in rebuilding the trust that was lost through months or years of broken promises. Mel Robbins once said, "You are one decision away from a completely different life." I would add, you are also one serious commitment away from leaving behind a life you're not proud of. Start with 7 days. Don't count how many things you check off. Count how many small promises you keep, and each one you keep will sound like the steady footsteps of someone returning to themselves. Quiet, but powerful. And something amazing happens. When you begin to keep promises to yourself, the world responds differently. People start respecting you more, not because they know the details, but because they feel the energy of someone who no longer compromises. Jim Rohn once said, "Discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment." But I believe it goes even deeper. Discipline is the bridge between an old self that's worn out and a new self rising one day at a time. And you don't have to sprint across that bridge, just walk it. Daily. One promise kept per step. One act of discipline as mortar rebuilding belief. After 7 days, you won't be a superhero, but you'll be someone you can look in the eye, someone whose word means something, someone you trust to not walk away when things get hard. No one may see you fighting in silence, but you will, and that's enough to change everything. Ending the day is not a physical act. It's a psychological ritual, a dividing line between those who live intentionally and those who let the day sweep them away like a storm of fatigue. People without clear goals often fall into the night like they're running from something, scrolling mindlessly, eating without presence, falling asleep with their minds still running 100 open tabs, and they wake up the next day feeling dragged by life, unsure why they're so exhausted, even though they didn't do much the night before. But those who live with purpose are different. They end the day like a conductor lowering their hands after a symphony, not because everything went perfectly, but because they directed each part with intention. They don't go to sleep to escape. They go to sleep to prepare, not to disconnect, but to recharge like a warrior who knows tomorrow is another battlefield that requires their full presence. I used to go to bed out of exhaustion, not completion. I used to crash into sleep with a blank heart and wake up feeling the same or worse. It wasn't until I learned to treat the end of the day as a strategy, not an afterthought, that I understood evening isn't the end. It's the foundation of tomorrow. And that foundation must be built not with surrender, but with awareness. Jordan Peterson once said, "You don't clean your room just for the sake of tidiness. You do it to establish order in your mind." Ending the day is the same. You don't build a nighttime routine just to have something to do. You build it to restore internal order so you don't carry chaos into your sleep and plant it into the soil of a new day. Start simple. Turn off the noise. No emails, no news, no drama. Just you and your private space where you reflect on the day with kindness, not criticism. Ask, what did I do well today? To acknowledge yourself. What could I improve? To learn, not to judge. And most importantly, what do I want to feel differently tomorrow? To plant the seed of a more intentional version of you. Then, write down 3 tasks for tomorrow. Nothing fancy, just clear. Because when you start your day with something you chose the night before, you're living like someone with vision, not someone who always reacts to what's urgent. Finally, create a signal that tells your body it's time to rest. Turn off the lights, read a few pages, breathe deeply, play slow music, anything as long as it's intentional, because sleep isn't just for rest. It's when you give your mind recovery and your soul a quiet reminder we still have a mission, and tomorrow we return stronger. Jim Rohn once said, "When the day is over, it's over. Let it teach you, not torture you." And I would add, let the evening be where you return to yourself, not where you disappear. Because you deserve to end each day knowing you didn't abandon yourself, that you showed up, and that tomorrow will not repeat today. It will be better, clearer, and more worth living. People with purpose don't just wake up early and work hard. They know how to close the day like someone who's building a life. An intentional evening doesn't need to be perfect, but it must be honest, quiet, and fully present. Not because anyone is watching, but because you will feel it at 5 a.m. the next morning. 7 days ago, you might have started with doubt. You may have thought, what can really change in a week? But today, if you've done even half the work, you already know this. Change doesn't come from time. It comes from decision. It's not about who you were. It's about who you've chosen to become. You've learned to reclaim your mornings, refusing to let the world pull you away before you even knew who you were for the day. You chose to eliminate a weak habit, not because anyone told you to, but because you knew it was quietly eroding your self-respect. You moved with purpose, without music, without witnesses, simply knowing you're living like someone with a reason to exist. You cut the noise, you planned like a pro, you did the hard things daily. You spoke like someone who has already won, you dressed like someone with a mission, you built discipline brick by brick, and you ended each day with the awareness of an inner leader. You didn't become someone else. You simply peeled away the outdated version, the one who used to delay, to complain, to live on autopilot. You no longer wait for motivation. You are the motivation. You don't say, I'm trying. You say, I'm doing this every day. And each action, Each choice over these past 7 days hasn't turned you into a superhero. It's brought you back to your truest state, clear, intentional, and unwilling to settle for less than you're capable of. Mel Robbins calls it identity alignment. David Goggins calls it the silent victory. Jim Rohn calls it the seed that leads to harvest. Jefferson Fisher calls it proactive control, because communication begins with how you respond to yourself. I call it this: the courage to live true, with an inner order stronger than the chaos outside. And if you've made it through 7 days, then you know this much: you can do it. No applause needed, no spotlight required, just a mirror and your own eyes looking back saying, we're not who we used to be. So from today, you don't need more inspiration. You already have it. The only thing left to do is repeat. Repeat daily, repeat with intention, not for perfection, but because you now know each repetition lays another brick in the unshakable version of yourself. Remember this: the world doesn't need another copy of everyone else. The world needs someone like you when you live in alignment with the highest version of who you are. And that's what makes you unrecognizable, not because you've changed into someone else, but because you've finally shown up fully as yourself.